Godzilla absolutely needs no introduction. You all know who he is. He's the giant monster that destroys cities and fights other monsters sometimes too. He's a cultural icon that has been around for decades, and that popularity doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. But what if I told you that one of the films has a version of it that is very different from the final product, and probably will never see the light of day ever again? You probably won't believe me, but in this story, you will see this type of version of the film. So sit down, relax, and pray a giant monster won't destroy your home, because today we'll be looking at the story of Godzilla 1971, Uncut Footage. Detailed below are alleged events that occurred during filming and production of the 1971 film Godzilla vs. Hedorah. As such, are but rumors, yet some possess that they are true. From 1954 onward, the Godzilla series has become popular enough to be a staple of pop culture and an everyday phenomenon in Japan, with new movies being produced yearly on decent budgets. Half of it went towards costume design. It became a regular in what was known in the Shogun era of kaiju films, a trend that persisted well into the 70s. Much like everything else, the Godzilla series of films began to experience franchise fatigue, with production values becoming cheaper and cheaper, new copying zooms eluding Saudi, and the recycling of stock footage. This particular phase of fatigue was never more evident than in 1969's All Monsters Attack. The abysmal final product put the entirety of the Godzilla franchise on hold for 2 whole years, allowing for the general public to forget about the disastrous film, and enough time for the minds at Toho to regroup and eventually start work on another film. It was originally intended for the franchise to end after the release of Destroy All Monsters several years prior, but the release of yet another film made it impossible to end a franchise that has made them famous. So it was quickly decided that work on another entry into the franchise was to start immediately. It was decided early on that the next installment would carry a message much like the original Godzilla film, close to 20 years prior. But rather than focusing on the dangers of nuclear radiation, the message would instead focus on pollution and the effects on the environment. From this idea, Godzilla's opponent, Hedorah, was formed. Designed to be a smog monster, Hedorah's appearance was originally much different. The initial draft was similar to that of Godzilla, although with a stockier build, a large face, and more rounded teeth, and an enraged great skull. More or less a non-threatening design. This appearance would be the groundwork for the new film, and as such, a new, young director was chosen to lead. Quiet, introvert, and quite often science described as imposing, Yosamu Banno was chosen as the director for Godzilla vs. Hedorah, an undertaking that made the company uneasy to say the least, as Banno has yet to ever direct any kaiju film, much less a Godzilla one. Toho hesitantly allowed Banno to take the reins, and the project continued as expected. Unfortunately for the team, as well as Toho, things would not go as planned. Banno started confident in his ideas that he proclaimed regularly, and his co-workers often describe his visits for the film as off the wall and strange. Given only 35 days to shoot the film, Banno and co-writer Taiki Kuruma often locked themselves away on weekends and berated back and forth over potential film ideas. One report claimed that Banno and Kimura yelled furiously until the early morning. either leaving the room until an argument was made. Bano was also known for changing ideas last minute, turning Hedorah's design from a Godzilla X monster to a large, throbbing blob, a treadmill-like creature with large, red eyes, mere days before the costume building process was to begin. As time went on and filming progressed, tensions went high between production and the actors themselves, as many suits ended with several arguing that the scenes weren't just right after the actors had repeated them many number of times, leading to them storming off from each other, actors declining the capabilities of the production team and not speaking to him until the next suit. As these spats between them engaged higher and higher, Bano himself often remained disconnected from these events, as every time they would record, he would simply leave. But not before quickly speaking his own mind how he thought none of them performed up to his par. This irritating and disconnected behavior persisted to the point of extremely, in some cases, as actor Kenjiba Satama, who portrayed Hedorah, was struck during filming with appliances. Doctors were forced to perform the amputotomy while still removing the Hedorah suit, not because it was too endurable to remove, but because Bano ignored Satama's serious complaints until other members of production stepped in and helped. When questioned later, Bano simply stated he was ignorant to the crimes and had too much to the film in too little time. Some say Bano would lock himself in his office with small supplies of food for days on end after these heated arguments, speaking, but to no one in particular, occasionally cussing loudly, thrashing, sending officers flying around the room. These occurrences would then be followed by long periods of silence, the only audible sound being Bano scribbling furiously on his notepad. On top of these was a particularly nasty rumor about the supposed 20 whole minutes cut from the final film. Around halfway through the film, Bano allegedly had several more scenes planned, which was described by others as disturbing and surreal imagery, more so than in the final cut, that would have helped pan out the story and further finalize Bano's vision of the film. Several examples of these alleged scenes were one in which Hedorah crashes a family's home, the mother and son outside, screaming as the father is crushed by the collapsing house in front of them. One, which portions are seen in the film, included a surreal dance party where the participants wore bunny masks, smeared unknown substances amongst the walls, injected Harriet, and even wrote non-sexual scrawling on any and all flat surfaces. Another would involve a young psychic child, upon sensing Hedorah's arrival, be plagued by horrific night terrors, featuring bizarre, macabre illustrations of previous kaiju that Godzilla had fought before. The last example was one that Bano himself described in detail to Tamesi Kumiya during a late-night session, and had Godzilla find Hedorah into a grassy countryside. They would continue to thrash around, the sky going dark, when Hedorah would gain the upper hand, wrapping its chancers around Godzilla's arms and neck, allowing for traces of blood to ooze from Godzilla's mouth. Bano expressly exclaimed that the way Godzilla would win was to sow assault from Godzilla behind, and to watch as Godzilla's hand tore through to the back and then thrust forward, effectively tearing Hedorah in two. While later Godzilla fans would take a more violent approach, this idea was still struck down almost immediately for being too over the top, considering the vast majority of the audience for those films were children. These changes, which did not please Toho, were cut from the film prior to release, much to Bano's dismay. As there was no time to refilm certain scenes, the final cut of Godzilla vs. Hedorah was even more bizarre than intended. It was described as eerie, bizarre, in the most extreme cases, utterly nonsensical and insane. Bano himself, however, was extremely pleased with the results of the film. So much so that he began writing a sequel almost immediately. Tomoko Kanatsu, who was a seasoned Godzilla director and also hospitalized during filming, went so far as to tell Bano that he had ruined Godzilla. Bano was not discouraged, as he was even more determined to have his sequel made. Despite his intentions, Bano was banned from directing another Godzilla film, as his extreme approach to filming had left several members ostracized, as well as his dark ideas were deemed too unfit for the series. Bano, obviously unpleased with this turn of events, cut communication with many of his superiors as well as those around him. Many other projects were considered afterward, but Bano was scarcely heard from and was never seen again. The last accounts anyone has of Yoshimura Bano after his directorial debut are vague at best, but the only unforeseen consequences is as follows. Mere months after his ban, he quit his job as assistant director to several cartoons and cut contact with those around him. Picking his documents, among the remaining 20 minutes of footage not seen in the final film, he disappeared off the face of the earth. It's still unknown what happened to Bano, or what became of the 20 minutes of footage. But for better or for worse, neither of them were ever seen again.